Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Leaders and Strategy podcast. I'm your host, Mike Harris, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Lucy Barkas, author, coach, consultant, and podcaster in her own right with the Say It Sister podcast, and I would say expert on all things leadership. So thanks for joining us here today.
You're very welcome.
It's great to see you. We'll talk a little bit, I'm sure you'll talk a little bit about your book, but we'll get a plug in quickly. Leader X, which is a fascinating read, and as I say, we'll come on to that. But I always like to start these with giving you an opportunity to do a bit of a podcast pitch, which is effectively like a elevator pitch, but to a much wider audience. And you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, and the book.
Lucy Barkas. My job title, I guess, is Leadership and Team Development Consultant. But I've been working in the sphere of leadership for 12 years on my own, but I've actually got about 25 years experience. And I predominantly work with leaders and their teams to create really solid, aligned teams around a purpose so they can basically together achieve the ultimate. And we do that through workshops, we do it through coaching, lots of experiential stuff, because on the side I'm also involved in Scouts, so if I come up with a great task for the Scouts, I give it to my clients as well.
Do you give them badges?
I should do, shouldn't I?
Yeah,
I should. Yeah. And then, when I'm not doing that, I am a single mum, although my children are almost flying the nest. Heavily involved in Scouts, love to keep fit, got 2 amazing dogs. So that's when I tend to do my personal development, get my podcasts on myself. And I literally spend every opportunity reading, writing, talking about all things leadership and people development. So that's me, I guess.
Brilliant. Thank you. When I do these podcasts, I always like to start with what I call an icebreaker, and that's partly to get us into the mood for the chat, but also for the people who are listening, because I'm always conscious that, as you say, they might be walking the dog and their mind isn't necessarily in the place where they're going to be learning about strategy and leadership. So hopefully the icebreaker kind of helps set the scene for them as well. So we've decided, which is a common favourite actually, to run with the icebreaker. Name a fictional character that you admire as a leader and why. So I'll let you start.
So at the time of reading these questions, because didn't know which one was coming, but it was the rise or the entry into International Women's Day. So I thought, okay, let's think about women in leadership in literature or in fiction. And I actually came up with 3. I couldn't just take 2. So the first one is Merida. So I'm a mother of girls, so we watch a lot of Disney. And she was the first Disney princess as such, who I was like, she rocks. She is brave, she is bold, she doesn't go to any gender conformity. And family is her thing, she does everything for her family. And then my girls again loved the Divergent series, and Trish from Divergent is absolutely amazing. And the thing I love about her in her leadership is everybody thought she was the weird one, everybody disliked her, and then as soon as she believed in her own leadership and her own powers, once she got it in her brain, that was it. Everybody followed and she changed the world. And then I think there was probably Wonder Woman. So I was born in 1977. So I've got this picture of me when I was probably about 3 or 4 years old in the full Wonder Woman costume, got my lasso, and me and my brother.
Of truth.
Yeah, that's the one. That would be my superpower. Yeah. And it just stayed with me and then years later, I took my own daughter to go and see the new Wonder Woman, and her mouth was just open. She was like, I've never seen girls do that. And I'm like, oh, wow, what a privilege it was. So I think they are my awesome women in fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, I always go with the same one, and I should have thought of a new one for today, but I didn't, so I'm going to have to go with the same one again. And it kind of continues on a theme a little bit. So I always pick Captain America.
Ah,
And the reason I picked Captain America is because I think you can judge the strength of a leader through the strength of the team. And he's not actually the strongest person there. And he's very good at getting the best of the people around him, utilising their strengths and making sure that the team dynamics is what's,
yeah.
as a team, they're better than they are as individuals. So that's the one I picked, Captain America.
I love Captain
Yeah,
America.
so there you go. So that's good. So we'll come on to sort of talking about your book, really. So do you want to just give us a brief introduction about the Leader X
Yeah.
book and how it came about?
Yeah, so I started working with a lot of the leaders in around 2012 kind of period, and I started to see this real shift where a lot of the older boomers were starting now to think about retirement, and they were bringing up the next level. So a lot of my work was working with the next generation. So they were the Gen X, or the what we call the Zennials, those ones born on the cusp of technology. But they'd been waiting in the wings for so long because, let's face it, there were a lot of boomers. It was the boom, and they were holding on to positions. And so what I wanted to do was say, look, you've got these amazing people who are desperate to come up through the ranks, and they think differently, they act differently, they were born in a different time, so they've got different values. And if only I could almost like create this call to arms to say, now is your time to lead, which is why it says, 5 steps for a Generation X to step up, take control and lead with impact. And that's what I really wanted. And honestly, it was fabulous when it happened, when the book was released in March the 23rd, 2022, right as the pandemic hit. So on the positive side, it meant that I could go out and do like almost a virtual book tour because people were at home captive. But it also meant that people's minds weren't focusing on leadership at the time. Now, though, it's coming back in.
Although it needed leadership more than ever.
More than ever, yeah. And most of if you look at a lot of the, well, in the UK anyway, a lot of the politicians around that time and exist now are actually those Generation X. They're those in their late 40s, 50s. They need to read my book.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was disappointed actually because I learned something about myself that I didn't know. I've always thought I was Gen X, but I'm not.
Are you creeping into boomer?
I was born in 62.
So you can call yourself a Zoomer with an X.
Oh, is it? So I was always classed growing up that I was Gen X. So at some point the dials moved because in the book you talk about it being 65.
Yeah.
So I was thinking something's changed. So I'm
You're still classed as that boom generation.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
But what did you just call me? I'm a
Zoomer. So
Zoomer.
you have
that
these.
Sounds quite good.
Yeah, you have these cusp generations, which is why I call myself a Zennial. So as the two traditional, generations, most of the people are in there, but then you've got these cusp ones where things are starting to shift. So although you may have a lot of the same experiences as a lot of the boomers, actually you started shifting, just where the education system, the things we were watching on TV, the way that you were brought up, you might have quite a few.
Happy to go with Zoomer.
Yeah, be a Zoomer.
I'll be a Zoomer. That sounds really good. There's a part of your book actually, which very early on, which I think sums you up pretty well. And that is that you said when you were first looking at leadership, your dad bought you The Art of War, and gave you that and said, "Have a look at this."
Yeah.
And you read it, and that wasn't for you.
No.
And I'll let you continue the story from that point.
Yeah. So I think I was about 22, 23 when I got my first management position. And he was incredibly proud of me, but he had come up through the days of British Leyland and the automotive industry, which were heavily unionized, very masculine dominated, and yeah, he said, it is a dog eat dog world. It is the Gordon Gekko era, and you're going to need this book to survive. And I've got to admit, there were some valuable lessons in there just about human dynamics. It was really good, but I thought, I never want to lead in a world where I have to watch over my shoulder and play games and lie and cheat and all those kind of things. And so I chose not to.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Unfortunately, a lot of the other people around me had read the book.
Well, I think the other thing, because I like the book,
Hmm.
but I like the book in the context that I think it shapes people's mind thinking about strategy
Mm.
and looking ahead and doing things differently.
Yeah.
So I think from a strategic point of view, but I think from a leadership, I mean, it was written 2,000 years
Yeah.
ago, so it's bound not to be relevant, really, isn't it? If you
Yeah.
take it in that context. And I think, therefore, from a leadership point of view, I don't know, it's not really,
Yeah.
but
Different time.
different time. But what it does, though, and I think this sums up your book really well. I don't know if you're going to agree with what I'm about to say, but when you look at it from Leader X, you're looking at Leader X being all about the team and all about the team members,
Yeah.
and not all about the leader.
Yes. The leader is there to serve
Yeah,
the people rather than everybody wanting the leader, you know, and worshipping them almost,
yeah,
putting them on that parapet, because actually, as we know, at any point in time, the people can tear that parapet down.
yeah,
And it's not to say that there aren't amazing leaders out there who don't command and control, because sometimes that is needed. But even when a lot of people talk about their war heroes, the ones that really stand out are the ones where those generals and colonels, etc., where the people say, "But we loved them."
yeah,
Or when they walked into our camp or whatever, they would come and sit with us and drink with us.
yeah,
They were a person of the people. So even when I look at these war analogies, which are supposed to be, you know, command, control, do as you're told, actually there are so many stories of great leaders that exist there who did it differently.
yeah. And actually, because I'm also interested in that kind of stuff. When you look at some of the great war leaders, and whether you like them or not, people like Napoleon, or you go back even to the Romans, they empowered all of the, so they broke everything down into small groups,
Yeah,
and they had leadership at levels who were empowered to make the decisions.
yeah,
It wasn't all held by that person at the top. They were very clever
yeah,
in actually making sure. I mean, they had lots of other things wrong with them,
yeah.
but in that context, it wasn't about
Yeah, it
command and
was like
control.
the early model of how it could
Yeah,
be. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so it's fascinating, all of that. So in your book, you talk about the values of
Mm.
Leader X, and I just thought it might be worth you, because again, a bit different, a different
Mm.
perspective on maybe how people look at leaders, or sorry, how people look at values,
Yeah.
generally in the context of business. So I
Mm.
just thought you might want to.
Yeah, so what I tended to see, so I actually went out there and did a lot of research, and put out polls and posts, etc., to try and get some real data. And I was asking two things. One was about a generation of people, and then I was looking at what do people want from a leader. And then I started to see that there was actually this trend that actually this group of leaders, or, you know, people growing up in this period, are actually delivering, or they're what's within them is actually the qualities that our people want.
Yeah,
And so there I bundled a lot of the words, because obviously people use lots of different words, but I bundled them all up into 5 different values. So the first one was about autonomy. And then I obviously went and did all the research as to, well, why is this generation particularly autonomous? So yeah, that's the first part of the book, all about values. But yeah, one is about autonomy, that actually this generation not only learned to grow up and make decisions for themselves, figure things out for themselves. We didn't have digital world back then, so if you were stranded in the countryside because you had a flat tire on your bike or something, you had to figure it out for yourself. And so when they start to lead, then of course they actually want their teams to be autonomous and make
yeah,
decisions for themselves. The other one is they value freedom. Again, the time that they were born into, they had their grandparents who had fought for freedom, so it was a value that was instilled into them. They were often children of 2 working parents, so they ultimately had freedom. And again, you know, they reached young adulthood when the Cold War ended. This hostility around the world had started to come apart. Apartheid ended, and so we started to see the old structures go falling apart. And then, like, there was this real energy of freedom. So that's inbuilt into them. And so
Yeah.
again, they are very empowering. They want to have fun. And honestly, you go to Glastonbury and most of them are my age. You know, we never want to grow old. We always want to have fun, but we build that into our work. And then we value experience. So not just about the experience of working and developing and ourselves, but actually the experience of having a good time at work, the experience of teamwork and having camaraderie in the relationships. And off the top of my head, I completely forgot what the other value is. Go on, get it for me.
I'll find it.
Relationship. I found it.
Yeah.
Relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that really struck me, because I've always believed in the power of relationships. But what really struck me was that a whole generation did too. And I think what I discovered was, again, this was a generation of young kids who their parents still said, you know, almost like the kids had their lives, the adults had their lives. It wasn't, you know, like we are now where we're the family unit. And so a lot of the kids learned to find their relationships through their friends. And whether it was down the park or later on, we see it with things like TV programs like Cold Feet and Friends. You know, your friends became your family. The value of you and importance of your relationships, you know, made your life amazing. And that then worked into the networks that you then create in the workplace. So yeah, that's well, read the book, honestly. It goes into a lot more depth.
No, but it was great because they're not the values that, I mean, and I talked about this a few times on the podcast, because I get frustrated that people talk about things like trust, on honesty and teamwork as values. And I say, but everybody says the same thing. So are they really values? I mean, I'm not saying people are dishonest or want to be.
They're aspirational. They're not true values.
But they're not really what makes you different or what you believe, or what you believe that's different to others. And I mean, the comparison I always use with people is, you ask somebody to name one of their weaknesses and they'll go, "Oh, I suffer falls gladly." I've never heard anybody say they suffer and fall gladly.
No, there you go.
So it's not really a weakness, is it? And it's a bit like that with some of the values people say. They say, "Oh yeah, one of my values is trust." But when you actually look at how they behave day to day, they're not. Do they really?
They lie, they cheat, they cover.
You know, but they justify to themselves why they do it. So I thought what was great was that you actually had a set of values that were real to the people that you were talking to, the if you like, the Generation X leaders, that actually made a theme kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word, was kind of common to everybody, but helps bring them together.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was going to talk about this in the end, but I kind of come to it, so I'm going to talk about it now. And you actually use the term as Leader X as a movement.
Yes.
And those values very much sit with it actually being like a movement. I just wonder what, you know, in your mind, do you think that there is a movement there? Have you seen it as a success as a movement?
Yeah. Yes and no. So there are certainly movements that we can see. So one really good example is the B Corp movement. And so rather than valuing organisations based on just their turnover, if they're in the FTSE, for example, we're starting to see the B Corp index of companies that are actually doing the right thing. And you see that most of the initial founders, but then the initial members were Gen X, who were like, we're going to do things differently. And you see pockets of this everywhere. And I think it also comes down to, for my generation in particular, that one of the go-to movies was either Star Wars or The Goonies. And that was what it was all about. Come on, we're in this together. We're doing this. And I think that camaraderie, this movement, it's absolutely there. But unfortunately, the world is crazy right now, and it has been since the book came out, and it's, you know, people are distracted. So my hope is that, you know, the message gets out there, will galvanize even more. I have hope.
Yeah. We had a guest on the podcast, Tom Holbrook, and he talked about the world being crazy, but he said that when he talks to people, he said, well, go back 5 years, it was crazy then. Go back 10 years, it was crazy. And maybe for different reasons. Go back 20 years, it was crazy. You know, so there's always something going on that seems mad
Yeah.
that we're trying to deal with. But actually, it's always been like that. So
I think
you've
the
kind of got to
challenge,
work around that.
yeah, the
with what
challenge
we're
now
doing.
is that because of the way we've got our digital
Oh
lives,
yeah,
everything is in your face. Whereas before you could put down the newspaper or turn the telly off. Now it's bing, 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 bing,
yeah,
and then you go and into the office or you meet somebody and they are, you know, talking about it. It is literally in your face. So I purposely do turn my telly off, and I don't have any news apps on my phone or anything, because I truly believe that if it's important enough, I'll hear
you
about
find
it.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you're more likely to actually
Yeah,
hear what's really
because
going on.
otherwise I do just go into fear mode. And I saw
Yeah,
this in January. I started seeing myself going into scarcity mindset, fear mode, and I had to just shift myself out of it,
yeah.
because actually it just makes everybody spiral down. And if you are a leader, that's not good,
No, it's
because
not good. No,
nobody's going to follow you.
and you can't make decisions based on 5 seconds,
No.
can you? Which is what technology is kind of
Spot on.
pushing you to do if you're not careful. So. In the book, you talk about the 5 my models. So I just wondered if you wanted to
Talk
just
through
touch
that.
upon those,
Yeah.
because I found that really interesting.
So what I was often getting with people who, so often it was like the boss was coming to me and say that my senior leadership team, they're not working, so we need to you know, develop them. And they'd say, well, what we need is them to learn da 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 da. And then I'd say, it doesn't work like that. You have to go through these 5 steps to really invoke change and really develop people. So the first step is my present. So you've got to really be critical and analyze and be honest about what is the state of your team, organization, culture, whatever the thing is that you're trying to solve in the world. And some of that will be gut instinct. Some of it will be those employee surveys, customer feedback. You know, there is information everywhere. So it's looking truly, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses as an organization or a team? And then start looking at, right, okay, so where do you want to get to? And that's part of that visioning. And then looking critically and saying, right, okay, what's the gap from here to there? So then we look at myself, and this is to ask all individuals who are in that leadership, who are going to get you from here to there, to then say, but what are your strengths individually? What are your beliefs? What are your values? And then you put them all together and say, well, you know, have you got the capability to do what you want? Because there are so many leaders who come up with these ideas of, we're going to go this way. And then they realize they actually don't have the skills to get them there. So again, so it's really getting them to look critically. Then we look at my team and we talk about the leadership team essentially. And again, when you've got all these individuals with all these different skills, strengths, etc., you say, right, where are the missing pieces? Or are those two working together? Or how can you two work together better? So it's really looking at those team dynamics, the relationships, the strengths, and generally 1 or 2 people will leave that team as a result of this exercise. And I'm always really honest, because some people either don't want to change, or they are square pegs in round holes, or maybe it's time to move on. And then once they've got that team solid, then we look at my operations or my business. So we look at, what are all the blocks and barriers that are in the way? What are your priorities? How do you identify what your top 3 priorities are and where you align people around? And then they have to go away and put those in place. And the final piece is my legacy. And this isn't this big ego, you know, I'm going to have my name on a plaque somewhere kind of thing. This is about, are you genuinely going to leave the team, the organization, in a better state than what you you came into? So if you say, I'm only going to be around for 3 years, is it going to be better in 3 years because you led?
Yeah.
And that's a big question that a lot of people don't want to answer, because they literally are just leading in reaction mode.
Yeah.
They're thinking about today, not about 2, 3, 5, 10 years time.
Yeah.
So, and then the cycle just keeps going round and round and round.
And it's I mean, it's interesting, because a lot of what you say, although it's different language, are exactly some of the things I've been talking about on the podcast.
Good.
In fact, we filmed an episode this morning, which will have gone out by now, and I talk about what I think are the 10 top roles of a leader. And building a team is one of them.
Yes.
Is actually that, you know, make sure you pick the right people, you mould them into a team. And I talked about a mantra that I've always had, which is get the best people you can,
Yeah.
make them into the best team, and then over the next year and for every year, look to how you make them at least 10% better. So it's best people,
in my
best
book,
team, 10% better, kind of. And
I
yeah,
have the quote which I said, for a leader, you stand on the shoulders of the giants
exactly,
you create.
yeah.
And I think that's the point. It's like there's a lot of ego-driven people who call themselves leaders, but basically they're managers or directors, who try and suppress people. So they
Yeah.
always look amazing.
Yeah.
And actually, that's not your job.
No.
Because by the time whenever I've led a team, I know that the people who are doing the job day in, day out, heading this or doing that, they've actually got all the insight. They're the ones
course
who are
they are.
having the showers and getting the eureka moments.
And you actually want people who are better than
Yes.
you, particularly if they're specialists in their field. Of course, you want them to
Absolutely.
be better than you because you're not that expert. But
Yeah.
but just generally, it's much better to have people that are.
Yeah.
And then it challenges you, doesn't it? It makes you better as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
And then an episode we did recently, 10 Steps to Leadership. And because I like a gimmick, they all spell out leadership. That's the 10
nice.
steps. And one of them is H is helpful.
Mm.
And I find that most people forget that the job as the leader is to make things better,
Mm.
either on a global scale that, as you say, from a point of view of legacy, that things are better by the time they finish, and they're improving and solving problems and making making the business better, but also to help the individual grow and to make their them doing their job easier and better. So I think helpful is one of
And
those.
being helpful feels really good.
It does, yeah.
You get that dopamine hit every time you've helped
But
somebody.
also, funny enough, people that are helpful in return.
Yes,
If you
it's
help
like a
them,
trade.
people, yeah, exactly. So I think you're right about that legacy thing. It's not this. I want the company to be called the Mike Harris, Mike Harris Strategy Company. You want it to be, and I think of the legacy of people I've worked with or worked for in the past. And their legacy is the fact I remember.
Absolutely.
And the things they said and the advice they gave, and it still lives with me today, and it's made me better.
And you've
That's
passed it
on.
on.
And I've passed it on, exactly. And that's the real legacy that I think is really important. So, okay, so that's the five my's, which you pointed it out, actually, or actually the 5 steps in the subtitle, wasn't it? The 5 steps to Generation X. No, sorry, 5 steps for Generation X. In the book, you share some of your own stories. You call them my stories, doing little boxes at the end. Yeah. Is there any you'd like to kind of share that you think would be useful for the listeners and viewers of the podcast?
Well, I think there was one story which was almost like my defining moment when I was like, that's what I stand for. And I'd actually recently moved to Worcester. And I got a job in the energy industry, and there was an outgoing manager who we had about a month together while she showed me, what to do. And she was showing me this big, long report that I had to go into this database and I had to press that button and do this and I just stopped her. I said, I will never be running this report. And she was like, but this is your job. I said, no, we've got a whole team of data analysts that it's their job to do it. I said, this is not what I do. I'm not a data analyst. And she was really not very impressed with me. But as soon as she left, and I did give this to this amazing guy called Mark, who was bored out of his mind doing this repetitive task. And then he got this, and he was like, and I can enhance this and I can add that to it. And we can do this. And within 3 months, the whole the national sales team was singing our praises for developing this thing. And I just said, Mark did it.
Yeah.
It was all about Mark. Yeah. And so the lesson was I stayed in my lane. I knew fundamentally that I was not the right person to do that. And I delegated it to somebody who was, chomping at the bit to do it. And then I gave him the credit at the end. My part of that was the fact that I chose leadership. And just that was my part in the story. That is why we were successful. And so it was a fundamental learning for me that changed everything. And I hope more people learn a lesson from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 2 important parts out of that, really. One is quite often, if you don't know, you know somebody who does.
Yes.
So use them.
Yeah.
But the second bit, I think, that's really powerful in what you've said is sometimes if you get too much into the detail, you can't act as a leader because you can't
Absolutely.
step back. If you're producing that data, how do you sit back and actually analyze it and see it freshly? All you're ever going to see is those pieces of data.
Yeah.
So by getting somebody else to produce it allows you to be the leader
And it took
and
hours
take
to
that bigger
produce.
picture.
And my brain is not into data.
Yeah.
I do my whole personality profiles and I look at it and I'm like, that's why I was never going to be able to do that job. I don't cross the T's and I don't dot the
No.
I's. Would be wrong. And yeah, the whole time my head would have been in data and I'd have been oblivious to everything else that was going on around.
And your predecessor made in my view, made an essential or mistake, which is assuming somebody else would sort of copy her in doing the same role. I remember I was leaving a company and I was recommending my number two to take over from me. And she said to me, "But Mike, I can never do the job. I mean, look at what you do. I can't do the job." And I said, "Well, don't do it like me. Do it like you.
You're the only person that could do it like you.
You can do the job. You just
Yeah.
can't do it like me. But I'm not advocating you because you can do it like me. I'm advocating it because you can do the job. So be yourself. Do it your way." And to be honest, 3/4 of it you've been doing anyway. And I've been utilising you to do it. So okay, there's a quarter you're going to have to learn, but it's not about doing it like me. It's about doing it like you.
And I think
that was the mistake your predecessor made. I
absolutely,
think, assuming
and they need
it was
to grieve it almost to say that right, this person has left, and whether it's the new hiring manager or the team around them, there's this bit of grieving process so that they can say, okay, that time doesn't exist anymore. We need to be able to move on. And again, that is another real key point for any leader, especially if you're new coming into a team. You've got to allow the team to adapt with the change and support them through that journey. And there are tips in the book under the My Team part where it'll talk to you about how to really onboard and help them with that change process.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Well, humans are fascinating, aren't they?
But just that communication in itself is really important, isn't it? Because if you don't have that discussion, then they don't see what you're seeing or understanding it the way that you understand it. One of the things you've got in the book that I really like was your priority wheel gap analysis. I've never seen it before.
Okay.
And therefore I'm going to pinch it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, go for it.
And utilise it myself. I'll probably call it something slightly different.
You can call it priority wheel, it's fine.
But yeah, I thought it was really good. So fresh to me, I thought it was a great approach. So I thought I'd ask you to just expand on it and explain it.
So the actual priorities wheel itself is something I adapted from a very traditional coaching called the Wheel of Life. So if you ever go and do any kind of life coaching, the Wheel of Life is like the basic tool, and it's almost takes a snapshot of where you are now, and then at the end of the program, where are you now, and you can see how you've grown. But the difference with the priorities wheel is it's something that you as a leader, you can put whatever headings in you like, and you basically just draw a circle, and then you basically draw it like it's a cartwheel. So you've got all the 8 different spokes, and each section has its own title. So it might be finance, process, it might be trust. You could go with all the values of your team, sales, marketing, whatever it is that you want. And then 0 is the middle point, and the outer ring is 10 out of 10. So you set a time period. So maybe it's a year from now, 5 years 5 years from now. And what would be a 10 out of 10? Couldn't get any better when you look ahead in the future. And you just then look at it and say, and where am I now? And so you might say, okay, I'm 5 out of 10, or I'm a 1 out of 10. And then you basically, once you've marked them all out, you then go round with a big thick pen and draw around it, and you see how clunky your wheel is. And genuinely, what you tend to see is most leaders are really driving a wonky wheel. And that's why things get hard. The beauty of this is that you can do it as a team activity as well. And so you get everybody else to do theirs, then you map them. And then even if you just took one of those different topics, you can see where people are getting differences. And so as a leader, you might think it's all brilliant and it's an 8, and then you've got your team member saying it's a 1 around here.
That was one of the things I was going to ask you, because you obviously use it with a lot of different organisations. How often do they give themselves 9 or 10s when you start?
most people have got some humility,
Yeah,
and they are more likely to give 7s and 8s.
yeah.
And then when we start asking the probing questions about, really, if how close are you, or what are the gaps? That's when they start realizing, oh, maybe we're a
Yeah,
4, or maybe we're a 5. But it doesn't matter so much of what score they give if ultimately they want to get to a 10,
yeah,
even if they're a 9.
yeah.
Like, so what can we do to
What do you
close
need?
that
Yeah,
gap? And then when you start looking at the wonkiness, it might be, because I put so much focus on sales and marketing, and that's 10 out of 10. Oh, look, the team morale
oh
or
heavens,
operations
yeah,
is breaking. And so again, you're looking at your organization holistically
yeah,
rather than just functionally. And it's like a system, a web, and you've got to make sure that all the strands are really strong.
yeah.
And essentially from that, hopefully you can come up with 3, 4, 5 priorities. And as a team, because everybody is input into it, they're all agreed, right, these are the top
That's the
3 things,
focus.
5 things we do.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's it. Strategy done.
Strategy done, yeah. Well, I look a lot with customers. I talk about one of the key challenges. So in the year ahead, start with the obstacles and then pick 4 key challenges. Because those are the things you're going to have to overcome to make
Yeah.
sure that your plan or your strategy is successful. And it just seemed to me that the priority will gap analysis was a means of actually looking at the same subject, but in a nice structured way. And I always find it fascinating that it's not true of everybody, but I find if you talk to people, for instance, go through your strengths and weaknesses, you'll either get 10 strengths and 2 weaknesses, or 10 weaknesses
Yeah.
and 2 strengths. Very rarely do people actually give you sort of 5 and 5 of each, or 10 and 10 of each, because most people are either very glass
Yeah.
full or very glass empty.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if that kind of came through in this sometimes, that people are either ultra optimistic or pessimistic about
Well, that's why
their
doing
view
it as
as a
doing
team.
independently and then layering it over the
Yeah,
top really works, because and we often do it anonymously as well. So they'll give me the sheets and then I go and mark them all.
right.
And so then we say, oh, look at the gaps. And so you're not saying, well, who said this and who said that? The question then comes like, oh, there's a huge gap there. What are we making up about that, or what
And
do you
then they
think's
can
going
review
on?
it, can't they? Every quarter or
Exactly.
every 6 months or whatever,
Well, yeah, it's like a
to see the
Polaroid
progress.
snapshot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent. I mentioned it earlier that I always like to finish with some homework, set the viewers and listeners something to do after the podcast. And I think you maybe touched upon your homework for the viewers. So back to you about the widening the books and
Yeah.
what people should look at.
So as I was going on my own leadership journey, all the books that I was reading, all the sources, they were all written by men from a time when mainly it was men in leadership or in the workplaces. And so when I started to see more female writers about leadership or work or teams, and I started to see what was important to them and their style and their insights, my mind was blown. And so now I put the best of the masculine and the feminine leadership
And
together.
are there any books you could recommend?
Other than my book,
Obviously the best one.
yeah,
And then after that,
there's a really good book called Multipliers.
yeah.
I can't remember the woman's
Well, if you let
name.
me know afterwards,
Yeah,
then I can put it. We'll put it
brilliant.
in
So
the.
yeah, Multipliers, amazing book, made me think very differently. And I will say one of the books that really changed my thinking was Sheryl Sandberg's book called Lean In. So I will, yeah, get you that other name.
Give us the names of the books, or the authors rather. We'll put it in the description below. On the YouTube channel, I'm looking over at Toby at the moment. On the YouTube channel, we normally put some graphics up
Yeah,
where
brilliant.
appropriate, so we can put images of the book and things, and that will help. So there's your homework for today. Go and look at some books by female writers with a different view maybe on leadership, and then come back and let me know what you've learned from that, how you're going to change, how that's going to make you think differently about leadership. Because there's no doubt, as I said earlier, that book has made me think differently.
Great.
And it's great because it's really important that we're always evolving and taking a different perspective, and things don't stay still, do they?
No.
They I talked to a client recently about this, that the world is always changing. 2 years ago, none of us would have been talking about AI.
No.
Not even thought about it. 5 years ago, work from home would have been an entirely different discussion if somebody came and spoke to you about work from home. So the world is constantly changing, and it's really important to think differently and learn and be, we expect the business to continually improve. So why don't we expect ourselves to continually improve with it?
Amen to that.
So there you go. So thanks very much for joining us. I've really found it very interesting and fun. It's been great.
Me too.
So hopefully you've enjoyed it as well. Come and join me again next time for our next podcast, which I'm calling "But People Are Not Your Greatest Asset." I'll see you then. Cheers.